Yeah, so it is Thursday, it is week 5, so by my math, that means we're about halfway done with the quarter already, which seems very odd to me, but that's how fast quarters whiz by. So I know some of you guys are probably starting to have P-sets and midterms and stuff that are due. It's probably getting pretty intense, so I appreciate you being here. So what's going on with us is, last time we started learning about libraries, we saw Picasso library for looking at images. We saw an Ion library for connecting to websites and downloading data off the internet. We saw a couple of other libraries as well. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about how to pull data from web-based sources. And I wanted to cover libraries before I got to this because you need some libraries to do what I'm going to do today. In fact, a lot of the stuff we do in the rest of the course, I'll sort of throw in a library to help me get to it or whatever, because that's just kind of how you do it. When you write Android code, you almost always interact with some number of libraries in your project. So, that's how it'll be going forward. A couple quick things. I wanted to mention that we have a new homework assignment that just went up, I think, this morning. It's homework 4. Homework 4 is called Friender. It is an online dating app, but it's for friendship because I thought maybe dating was a little too spicy for homework assignment. So you're rating people that you want to be friends with, and what exact activities you and this friend would do are up to you to decide. And just for fun, since it's about finding friends, I inserted the data of the characters from the TV show Friends as a data set that you can search through. The point of the assignment is mostly to practice some of the material we learned last week about fragments and multiple activities and different layouts and this kind of stuff. Also kind of similar to the stuff you did in section this week. If you would like to incorporate some of the most recent material like libraries, I think it might benefit from something like Picasso Library or some of these other libraries, so you're welcome to use them if you like. Anyway, you can take a look there. There's also a couple of other data sets if you want to play with them. My wife loves to watch this TV show, The Bachelor, and so I made a data set of characters on The Bachelor. You can have them be your friend or whatever. You can even make your own data set if you really want to. Anyway, go take a look at that later. It's due, wait, that can't be right. Monday, the February 11th? No, that's wrong. That's wrong. Sorry, were you scared for a second there? It's due a week and a half from now, so I think it should say the 18th. Sorry. And I mean, you wouldn't want this to be due the 11th. It's probably the most work of any of the assignments in the whole class. So it's not meant to be a killer or anything, but it's like I've had people tell me this one takes them longer because the fragment stuff takes a while to write up all those different activities and fragments and stuff. So I'll fix the due date later. I must have marked the wrong day in there. It's Monday the 18th is when this one's due. So anyway, that's posted. What I want to talk to you about today is these data sources that you can connect to gather data from the web. And so we sometimes call these REST APIs or RESTful web APIs. I'm just curious, have any of you ever written a piece of software that connected to a web API and pulled data from it and used the data? Bless you. A couple of you have? It's a RESTful API. The data, was it in what format did this data come in? Was it JSON data or something? Okay, yeah. That's kind of what we're going to do today. I'm assuming you haven't seen that or haven't done that. If you have seen some of that before, that's fine. I assume you have not. So remember last time we wrote this app that connected to my martystep.com website. It downloaded pictures of puppies, right? And the data there were kind of two things we did. One was that we would, grab puppy pictures from some URL like a JPEG image and display it on the screen using this Picasso library. But then we also had to find out what are the set of images that are available. And the way we found that out was that I had just put this text file on the web that had the list of all the file names. So we could go fetch that text file using this Ion library, and then we could loop over it or split it up by line breaks, and that would tell us, the names of all the files and stuff, right? So I think that data source and then that list of files was sort of like a really crappy API. An API would be sort of like a data source and a set of commands you can use to interact with the data source. So that's kind of the idea. So most apps connect to some kind of data. Wow, those images look really big. I don't know why. Oh well, it looks big. Most apps connect to data or talk to data. I mean, literally just any app you can think of that you find useful, that you use on a regular basis, it probably talks to some kind of server, some kind of data to make the app interesting. You often, when you have data, you're talking about a client and a server. A client is the machine or the place that is asking for the data, and the server is the place that's storing or hosting or housing the data, something like that. Usually pictures of these things look something like this, where there's some sort of big tank of a computer in a warehouse somewhere with a bunch of disks and a bunch of space, and maybe a lot of these, and you're connecting through the internet with your device. You're the client connecting to the server. There are lots and lots of different ways to connect to data. I think what has kind of taken over the world is to connect to data using the HTTP protocol, which is basically using the same protocol that the web uses and just connecting to URLs. I mean, there's lots of different ways you could connect two computers to each other, but this is kind of the way that has become popular, is like you'll provide data to people at a URL and they'll point their device to that URL and the data will come back to them. So there you go. Now, another thing that's interesting is when you have data that comes from one computer to another, you have to think about format of data. Like when I send you this information, what format is it stored in? How am I going to know what to do with that data when it arrives? So you guys have sometimes dealt with different kinds of data before. You can store data just in a text format, like the example that we did last time with puppies. The list of all the different puppies was just a text file, martystep.com/ I have a Trump page, I won't show that one today, dogs/ you can go to files.txt. This is just a text file, and all the file names are just listed here. They're separated by /n, line breaks. I could have made them separated by commas or by colons or anything. I just made up this format, and when you guys download this file, you guys sort of know what my format is. You look at this and you go, okay, I need to split it by /n. But you understand there needs to be some kind of mutual understanding between the server and the client. Like, I'm going to send you the data. It's going to be separated by line breaks. You're going to break it apart. Like, if I ever change this to be separated by commas, your code doesn't work unless you update your code to split it by commas, right? We have to have this understanding between those two places about the format of the data. So if you go back in old times, computing history, like back when old people like me were in school, it was like every different little file system, every different program, every different server would have its own like data format. I'll send you back this, and you need to look for a colon, or this one would use curly braces to separate things, and they would all invent these little formats, and you had to write a parser for those stupid formats where you'd look for this character and split this and split that, and it's just a pain in the ass, and you don't want to deal with this. So of course, what you want to do is you want to have everybody somehow agree. Like, why don't we just always put our data into a certain format? Of course, it's very difficult to get a bunch of nerds to agree on something like that, right? Because they all are particular and they all want to do everything their way, and there's no one room everybody gets in to talk about this stuff. So luckily, through the years, now that we've gone on, we seem to have settled on a small number of formats that almost everybody puts their data into. And so the good news is, if there aren't as many popular formats, then almost every language, almost every app toolkit or operating system can provide utilities to read those formats and parse those formats, and we can work with the data more easily. Because, you guys probably written some code in your lives to process an input file, like maybe 106B or something. You look for these different things in the strings in the input file, and pretty quickly it gets complicated and annoying. And so you kind of just want the slicing apart the data to be easy, right? This is pretty easy because it's just separated by line breaks. I think where things get complicated is if you imagine a structure, maybe even a nesting. If I'm going to send you back data about Stanford courses, well, it's like courses have names and numbers, and they have a list of students in them, and how do I separate the list of the students? Are there commas? Are there line breaks? Do you know what I mean? Like, if I tried to send you that back as text, you'd have to write a whole bunch of code to slice it all apart to pull the pieces of it out. So let's not invent our own stupid format for that. Let's just do something more standard. Anyway, the way the data is usually presented is in something called a web service. A web service is kind of a general term. You guys maybe heard this term before. I think a lot of people use the term and they don't totally know what it is or know what it means, but it just generally means when a server is offering some kind of functionality that is connected to over the web, over HTTP traffic, but that the service is not particularly a set of web pages. Normally, if you type in a URL, what comes back is a web page written in HTML, and then your browser displays that page, and you look at the page, you read the page or whatever, right? So this is like some sort of functionality provided over HTML that is generally speaking not web pages. So like I said, the client requests a certain URL, and then the server, based on that URL, sends back some sort of data. So an example would be like, imagine that I buy a website called like martydata.com, and you can connect to this site. This is not a real site. It might be. I didn't make it. But you can connect to this site like that. But if I want to give you back certain kinds of data, let's imagine that the different kinds of data I want to allow you to have access to are, you can query this thing to learn all the meals that I eat, because I somehow save that in here. You can also learn where I am now or any other time in my, this is like perfect for a creepy stalker who wants to follow me around or something, or you can dig up photos of me or something. These are all things that this site would give you. So if you want to say like, I would like to know what meals did Marty eat yesterday, you know, perhaps, I mean, it's a fictional thing, but perhaps you would say, I want to connect to, you know, martydata.com/search/meals/2019-0206, you know, something like that. Like, and the server would look at that URL and it would sort of look at the pieces of that URL and it would understand what you wanted and it would send you back that information somehow. Now, how do I decide what the different names of these things are? Like, I just made that up, but like the server, presumably if this is a real API, they publish like, okay, if you type in this kind of URL, I'll send you this. They publish a documentation of the format of the URL that you're supposed to use. I think there's a real connection, correlation between this model and the idea of calling functions and passing parameters. So it's sort of like, imagine there was a class called Marty Data. So imagine you could do something like martydata.search meals parenthesis 2019-02-06. Like, that's basically that, except I just start like putting slashes in it and stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, the URL is sort of equivalent in some sense. I'm passing information to the server in that URL, basically as parameters, okay? So yeah, I could search for my meals like this, and I could say, you know, martydata.com search for a location, and maybe if I don't put any parameters, it gives me today's location, but I could also maybe put a date in there as well, or something like that. So that's generally how it works. You type in URL, sends it back. Sometimes these things are called web services. Sometimes they're called RESTful web services. REST, you might have heard that term, REST APIs. REST is kind of a weird term. The acronym stands for Representational State Transfer. You could go read about it if you want, but it's a certain subspecification of like how the service should work in terms of if you connect to it this way, it should behave in that way. It's kind of a set of, if you say my service is RESTful, it means it should behave in a certain way. You guys don't really have to worry about that for the purposes of today's class. It's a little bit of a detail. That's more of a thing you would think about if you were building an API and you said, I want my API to be understandable to people who use a lot of APIs. You might try to make sure it was behaving in a RESTful way. But anyway, you don't have to worry about that distinction very much. But again, it's a lot like calling a function, but the function is being executed on another computer and its result is being returned to you over the web. Okay? And actually, this concept has existed for a long time. When I was in college, Java was like hot stuff. Java came out in like 1995, and I started college in 1997. And so everybody was like all abuzz about Java. And Java had this cool feature called RPC, Remote Procedure Call, where you could like make an object and call a method on it, but then secretly it would contact a server and it would run the method over there. And then it would send the result back, and it all was kind of like transparent to your code, and that was like super cool and radical, and that's basically the same idea of what we're talking about here. Okay, so why is everything done this way? I'll ask you guys, just a kind of open question, like, why do you think the world has standardized itself on data being stored on the web and connected with these web services and sent back like this? Like, why do you think that's the way we all seem to have decided to share data with each other? What do you think? So it's platform independent. This obviously doesn't have to be on a Windows, a Mac, Linux, a mobile device, a laptop, a giant computer. Yeah, like the web is a very lowest common denominator sort of technology that like every respectable computing device seems to have a way to access, right? So this is just easy to kind of plug any device into. You wouldn't want to do this where you have to install a stupid device driver on your computer and you have to download the update patch for the Mac version and you have to reboot it 17 times for the Windows version, and Linux just give up and compile your kernel and then throw the computer in the bathtub or whatever you do. Like there's no platform specific crap that you have to do for this. It just kind of works, right? Yeah, it's leveraging an existing ubiquitous technology. It's kind of the least bad thing. The downside of this model is like this is not the most efficient way to do data transfer. Like if we had all picked some other standard, we probably could be getting more bandwidth or something in our apps, but this has really helped with like easy adoption of these things. So okay, that's kind of what a web service is. Any like questions about this so far? Question about like what a web service is? Okay, well, so that's great and all, but like where do I get this data from? If this is the general way that data presents itself, like where is it? Where do I go? Who has data? The answer is that there are a lot of different sites and companies and people who provide data in this way, and so I can't even hardly scratch the surface of this today. I'm going to show you like 2 or 3 APIs you can connect to. There's like millions of them, and frankly, there's probably an API for the exact thing that you would wish you could get. Like, I wonder if I could use an API to connect to Instagram and look at somebody's photos, or I wonder if I could use an API to call Google and query something, get a result for a search. Yes, all of these things have APIs. I mean, there's some details to it, like you can't just connect to your ex-boyfriend's Instagram and download all his photos without his permission or something. That's not the point. But like, you can, in general, write a program that connects to Instagram and searches for stuff or looks up photos, and if you have the right access, it'll let you get the photos and so on. And yeah, lots of people publish web APIs. It's really cool because you might wonder like why do they do this? I guess a lot of tech companies enjoy giving you a platform that you could use to write software on top of. They think it's nice to provide this to you. So I'll show you a couple of them in a second, but if you just want to find whether there's an API or what the API is for some given kind of data, I wonder how I could get the weather, and report the weather. I wonder if I could find the Caltrain arrival times, and I could give you a pop-up if your train is late or something, right? Like, yeah, they probably have an API, Google for Caltrain Web API or REST API. It's probably, not always, but it's probably there somewhere, So in a good case, what happens is you just search for this API and you go look it up and you find some documentation and then you just start like using it in your code and there you go, you're done. Sometimes it's not quite that simple because most APIs don't just let random anonymous people send infinite numbers of requests to their API. Because there's, you can imagine there's maybe some potential for misuse there, like I'm sending 1 million requests per second to my ex-boyfriend's Instagram, or like I'm submitting phony baloney requests to DoorDash and having pizzas delivered to people or whatever. Like you can imagine misuse of APIs or even bugs. I have a bug that submits 1 million pizza requests. It's just as bad, yeah.
What does API mean?
API stands for Application Programmer Interface. It's just basically an understood set of classes or methods or commands that an application or library developer has communicated to another developer. So basically an API could be like, I wrote a story class for you guys for homework 3. I will tell you what all the commands are that it has. So I'm documenting the API of that class, and now you know how to call them and use that class. Or it could be, I have published a set of functionality on a web service on the internet. If you type in these URLs, I'll send you this data. If you type those URLs, I'll send you that data. That communication and sort of contract between those two parties of developer is called an API. So in this context, the API is a set of functionality along with the documentation of what it'll do and how it'll behave. Okay. Anyway, so some of these things don't just let anybody off the street connect and use them. Now, some of them do, so I'm going to use some ones that let strangers connect today. But a lot of them want you to create some kind of account, and they give you something called a key, an API key. And when you connect to the web service, you say, I would like this data or this URL, but somehow you also say to them, like, here's my key, here's who I am. And then they at least know, like, oh, okay, it's Ashley who's connected to me, the last 10 requests, that's from Ashley. So if you don't send a key, it won't give you the data. And if you do send a key, it at least knows who you are. The web service might know who you are in some other way, because usually when two computers connect, they know each other's like our IP address or something. But that's not usually enough to know who it is. Sometimes computers share IP addresses, sometimes computers change IP addresses. So honestly, just most of these APIs want to know who you are. They want to know who's using the service before they will send the data back. So you get a key, you send the key, you get the data. The thing is then if you are abusing or misusing the API in some way, they might block your key or throttle your number of uses per day. So a long time ago at Washington, I taught a web development course, and like they wouldn't, the university, the department I worked in, didn't want to offer this course. So, but I was like convinced, like the web is important, and like no one in the department agreed with me, you know. So I was like, guys, you should let me teach a web dev class. Let me create and teach a web programming class. And they didn't want to do it, and they phrased it as like, we don't have any money, we don't have any resources for this. So I start like going door to door at tech companies. Can you guys give us like some money so I can create a web dev class? You know, please. I'm just like, hat in my hands, give me some money, you know. And finally, Google met with us and said, yeah, we have a lot of web-based stuff, and we want students to learn about the web more, because when we hire people, they don't know anything about the web, and we want them to write web software, and it takes like a year for us to get them trained to do that, you know. So they said, yes, we want to encourage more universities to teach web programming. Here's some money. Go teach web programming. They said, but just one condition. We have this API, and we'd really like you to teach it in your class. Can you just like find a way to teach it in your class? It was an API for searching Google. You could search Google search results. You could find Google map data, stuff like that, you know. I was like, okay, sure. You know, I just sort of, blankly agreed to this general prompt. Okay, I'll teach your Google API, whatever. I was like, I don't have to like use it every day or something, do I? Do I have to like wear a Google shirt and like talk about how great Google is every single day? No. Just if you incorporate it somewhere, like into some assignment, then our people will feel like, okay, we're investing in teaching people this API. That'll help us get the funding request approved, whatever. So I agree. I'll use this API. And so then it gets to be about that point in the course, and I was really racking my brain, like, what am I going to do with this thing? Because usually you use these APIs to like build that sort of functionality into your project, right? But this API, all it did was like search Google and give you Google results. And I was like, well, the only thing I can think of to do with that is to like build Google. I can't think of like what would be an interesting, cool project that does that, And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Finally, I came up with a cool idea. I was like, I'm going to make Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Have you ever heard of this? It's an old computer game that then became a TV show, and I think it's become some other different properties over the years. It's an edutainment computer game where you're like searching for a crook, and she's named Carmen Sandiego, and she like steals something from like a museum in Peru or something, and then she gallivants around the globe stealing stuff, and you're trying to find her. You're probably wondering if I'm ever going to teach you anything today, aren't you? So you're searching for this crook. And so you fly to different cities around the world, and you talk to people, and you say, have you seen Carmen, or have you seen this crook, or whatever? And they go, oh yeah, I saw her exchanging all her money for Deutschmarks. And you go, aha, she went to Berlin. So you like interview people, and you get clues to know where to fly next. And so the game is basically teaching you like, oh, that's the state bird of Bolivia, or whatever. You're learning these facts about the world to help you track down this crook lady. So I thought, aha, so I'll write this game. The homework assignment will be that you will write Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, But what the API did, maybe you can see the connection here, is like you had a list of cities and you'd Google for like state bird of that city or state or whatever, and it would send you back a Google result, and then you would insert it into your app and you'd say, well, Carmen changed all her money into francs. Oh, French francs. Okay, that she's going to France. You know what I mean? So it's like that's why you need the Google API, because it'll just tell you stuff about these countries. Okay, great. Okay, point of this stupid story is like I got it all set up and I assigned the assignment to them, and I'd written my own solution and it all worked. It was super cool and ready to go. And then about the second or third day that the assignment's out, I start just getting all these emails like my assignment doesn't work anymore, my solution doesn't work anymore. It's because this stupid API had a limit of like 8 queries per hour. And then if you sent more than 8 queries per hour, it would just lock up and it wouldn't let you use it anymore. And so like I managed to get my solution to work. I didn't like have a lot of bugs as I was coding it. So I tested it a few times and it kind of worked. And I was like, okay, it works. And then all the students who, it crashes and you have to run it again, and it doesn't work and you have to fix it and you have to run it again. So they used up all their queries and then they couldn't use the API. So like the whole assignment, they'd have to like go take a break for an hour before they could work on this assignment. And I'm like calling Google, can you raise the API limit per hour? And they wouldn't do it and stuff. So it's like a big disaster. Okay, anyway, that's my stupid story. But the point is, most APIs, they use these keys to avoid things like you querying them 1,000 times an hour. Why did Google have that limit? Well, they don't want somebody scraping Google. They don't want somebody to Google everything and cache it and then make their own search engine where they basically stole the data from Google. So they don't want my students querying Google 1,000 times an hour either. These are all reasons why APIs sometimes have, are sometimes kind of tricky. So look, you won't know how to use an API unless it has documentation that tells you how to use it. Occasionally you'll find an undocumented API on the web somewhere. And then you have to like try different stuff and see what it does, but that's kind of a hacky reverse engineering kind of thing. We're not going to be doing that today. One other thing about APIs that's a little scary is if you start using an API in your project, you now become deeply dependent on this thing. And that can be a problem because maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe next year, API isn't there anymore. It changed or it went down or they start charging and you don't have any money or kind of something changed, And this isn't just me like hypothesizing here, because last night I was preparing for today's class and one of the APIs I wanted to use today was down. And I was really panicking because I didn't know if I could give my lecture today. I thought I might have to fill a bunch of time telling stories about Google and Carmen Sandiego. My whole thing, that whole demo I wanted to run wouldn't work, and the site was all down. And I actually found a whole nother API and got all ready to do that. And then this morning I got up and it's back up again. So I guess I'm going to do the original one. But, I'm just saying, like when you use these APIs, you become dependent on them, Okay, blah, blah, blah. There's formats for data. I was talking about how we don't want every single API to have some dumb format that we have to learn about and parse. So the format, I bet a lot of you have heard of, which is the most common format out there. It's called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. I don't think I want to tell you a big long story about JSON, but basically the short version is this began its life as a kind of a hack. JavaScript is the language of the web, and if you have a string of text that could be thought of as JavaScript code, like, imagine the string like int x equals 6 semicolon. That string, you could think of that as being a line of Java code or something. Well, imagine a string that contains JavaScript code. JavaScript has a command called eval that will take a string and then run it as if it were code. And so somebody came up with a bright idea of like, why don't I just send back the data as a bunch of declarations of JavaScript variables and then tell the client to eval that string, and then all those variables will exist in their program and they can look at them. And so that's kind of a weird hack that's turned into a popular data format. Again, it started out being used in JavaScript in web apps, but a bunch of people liked this format so much that it has spread everywhere. Lots of people are using it. We don't have to really think about JavaScript programming language to use this. It seems to have become the most popular of all of these formats right now. I just asked you guys who had used web APIs and web services, and the people who raised their hands seemed to all sort of nod that JSON seemed to be the format that they interacted with. Anyway, other formats exist. We'll talk about them a little bit today. There's one called XML that's pretty popular. You've seen XML, right? Where have you seen XML? Layout files and stuff, right? In your app, XML files. So you already kind of know about that format. You can send back data from a web service in this format as well. And again, it's like a big standard. Lots of people have written code to parse XML, so pretty easy to interact with. There's other formats it's kind of cutting off on the slide. There's one called YAML that's used in Ruby. There's other stuff, but these first two are the ones that I've seen the most. Like when I was in school, when I was learning, this was the big thing, XML, and then JSON kind of came onto the scene when I was in grad school or something like that, and now it's the big thing. Here is an example of JSON data. Now if you look at it, it probably sort of looks like code, right? Like, looks like you're declaring some kind of data structure or something, right? And I'll just tell you, if you copied and pasted this into a JavaScript program, that is a declaration of an object. In JavaScript, let me just, I want to help you understand this format a little bit here. In JavaScript, you can say things like val x equals 3. That's declaring, or it's var x equals 3. That declares a variable, it declares an int. You know, you can say var s equals hello. You declare a string, fine. You can declare an array, var a equals 10, 20, 30. That's an array. You can declare an object as curly braces. So in, in like Java, Kotlin, all these languages we've learned about, you don't just declare an object, you make a class. And you say what data is in the class and what methods are in the class, and then you can create objects of that class, right? JavaScript, they have a very like F it all attitude, whatever kind of attitude, where you don't really make classes, you just make individual objects and you put whatever data you want in them, and everybody can just be whatever they want to be. It's either really cool or really chaotic or both. So you can make an object and you could say something like name is Marty, age is, let's go with 29, that's not true. IQ, let's also go with 29, whatever. Like you can, that is an object. And so you could say like, object dot age plus x, and that would be 32. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that syntax between those curly braces is how to declare an object, and these something colon something, those are like the fields of the object, the name of the field, colon, the value of the field. You don't write the types of anything in JavaScript. It just figures it out from context. Like if it's a number, it makes it into a number. If it's got quotes, it makes it into a string, and so on. So like, I'm not really trying to teach you JavaScript today, but this is the syntax for like declaring data of sort of fundamental types in JavaScript. Now, having said all of that, if I pasted something like this onto the screen, if you just look at it for a minute, what you might find is I could say var obj equals that. And so it's got a variable name called private whose value is true. It's got a from variable whose value is Alice Smith string. It's got a thing that's 2, which is an array of Robert Jones and Charles Dodd. It's got a variable called subject. So like if I had that object, I could say obj.subject, and that would be the string tomorrow's birthday bash. I could say like for each element of object.to, that would be the people that are receiving this is a message or email or something. Do you understand? Like, so that thing that I have on my slide there is a declaration of an object of JavaScript data. That's why it's called JavaScript object notation. Someone's hand was up and I didn't call you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how do you define functions within an object in JavaScript?
Well, you can put methods like in an object in JavaScript. In the JSON notation, you don't or you can't, because JSON is not meant to be a full programming language. It's supposed to be a definition for how to describe data, not executable code operations. If I really were in JavaScript, the full language, I kind of don't want to go too far into that because we're not, it's not really the core point of today, but you could do something like, get older function this dot age plus plus, and then you could say object dot get older, and then object.age would be 30. You can do stuff like that. You know, it's certainly possible to do that. You don't do function stuff in JSON like with APIs that we're doing today. The purpose of JSON is just to declare the data or send you back the data. And again, the reason it's in this format is because like built into Kotlin, built into Java, built into JavaScript, built into every programming language that you care about is a JSON data parser that can just read this and like give it to you in a way that you can look at easily. So you don't have to, don't worry about like looking for colons and quotation marks and commas. Like you are not doing that. That's the point. Somebody else does that for you. That's why we agree on the format ahead of time, right? Question about this so far? Does this kind of data make sense what this is, you know? I've seen people who get a little confused by the hard brackets versus the curly brackets. The hard brackets are for an array, and the curly brackets are for an object. You could also think of an object as being like a map from keys to values, like the private key maps to the value true. Objects and hashes, objects and maps are kind of equivalent things in JavaScript. But like this to array here, it doesn't have key to value pairs here. It just has values. So like this thing is the value at index 0, and this thing, Charles Dodd, is the value at index 1, you know? So implicitly, those are array elements inside those hard curly, or hard square brackets there. Okay? So I think my next slide kind of annotates some of this stuff. And of course, one of the things about JSON data is that it's often nested. There's an object inside of an object inside of an object. The overall outer object that stores everything has an object inside of it, stored with a key of message that has those things in it. Okay. Fine, so that's what JSON data looks like. Let me skip ahead for a second. I want to show you a specific example of an API. I like to start with this one because it's simple and stupid. It's everything I want. Oh, it's simple, stupid, and free. It doesn't require an access key. So that's basically exactly what I want from an API. This is called the Chuck Norris REST API. Maybe Chuck Norris is not cool anymore, but if you don't think he's cool, that's your fault, not his. Chuck Norris is an actor who appeared in a lot of action movies in the day, and he's a real badass, and he can like kick everybody's butt and stuff like that. So a lot of memes have happened on the internet about how cool he is or badass he is or something. Have you heard of Chuck Norris, or is this like, I mean, as a meme probably, you've probably never actually seen anything with him, but you've seen memes about this man. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, like there is a Chuck Norris API. I cannot imagine a serious use of this, which is perfect. So let's do it. So what does this thing do? Like I Googled for like stupid APIs and I found this. So I went to their, like I'm just trying to explain to you, like I don't want you to think of me as the oracle of knowledge here. Like I found this by Googling, I read their webpage, and that's how I made my slides. And so I don't want you to think that you need me to teach APIs to you really once you've seen one or two of them. Like, so like the way to use this API is you start your URL with this part, and then I put kind of a blank, which means you should follow that by one of these options here. So one of the options is you can say /jokes/random. It will send you a random Chuck Norris joke. So if I like type this in here and I do /jokes/random, it says, sorry, I will say some of these jokes are not PG rated, but oh well. A high tide means Chuck Norris is flying over your coast. The tide is caused by God pissing his pants. Oh, whatever. That's a little bit irreverent. Refresh it again. The show Survivor originally had the premise of putting people on an island with Chuck Norris. There were no survivors, and no one is brave enough to go to that island to retrieve the footage. Whatever, right? Just stupid jokes about this man. Okay, but it's like surrounded by brackets and crap. Do you see that? Most APIs, like if I just copy this out and paste it into a text editor or something, it's all on one line. And so, I've been showing you these examples of JSON data that were sort of nicely formatted like that. that's for human reading, you know, but like if the thing is being consumed by a computer algorithm or parser or something, you don't need all the pretty indentation and spacing to read the thing. This is for us to learn from. So most APIs send their data back in a smushed format like this. It's equivalent. White space is not meaningful in JavaScript unless it's part of a string or something. So one thing you might find is if you have the data and it looks like this and you're trying to just read it and you can't read it very well, you can usually find websites like that will format your JSON for you so you can read it. You don't need to do that in order for your code to process it, it's just for us to look at. So like if somebody sends you something that looks like this and you want to read it better, go just Google for JavaScript JSON formatter, or sometimes it's called a pretty print kind of an operation. So if I just load up this page, there's lots of pages like this, but if I just paste in the code on the left, bless you, it makes it look better formatted on the right. So let's just take a look at this, okay? That's what it really looks like. So the overall payload of data that comes back is a JSON object that has a variable called type with the value success. I guess that's telling me that the request for the data was successful. And then the value of the data that has come back is a nested object that has an ID of 108, a joke of the text of the joke, and a categories field. I think some of these jokes are in different categories, like funny, offensive, cool, I don't know, whatever. Like you could put these different, I didn't make this up, like somebody else made up this API. So like I want to write with you guys a piece of code that will like show random Chuck Norris jokes on the screen, okay? So one step of that, oh yeah, question, yeah, go ahead.
Is the parentheses around like the value of the map in the object because like in JavaScript you should need to like have strings be your keys?
Do you mean the quotes here like this?
Quotes around like the,
yeah, I mean in real JavaScript you don't need quotes for these. But in JSON they decided to quote them, and I think part of the reason they do that is because they don't want any collision between programming language keywords. Like if your programming language has a keyword of class, they don't want to forbid the name class as one of the fields here, so they just put them as I think that's the reasoning behind some of that. But yeah, basically these quote marks, you could think of it as that they're absent. Like this is a field named class whose value is the string success. There's a field named value whose value is this object here, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if we want to connect to this super useful Chuck Norris API, fetch random jokes, and display them on the screen in an Android app, we need to connect to this URL, to this website, right? How do I connect to a URL of a website?
the library.
Yeah, that's pretty good answer. If I ask you a random question in this class the rest of the quarter, use a library for that. Yeah, we used a library Ion that you could connect to our URL. I'm going to do that in a second. But even if we use Ion, I mean, okay, let me do that then. Let me show you what we have here. We have this very minimal, I didn't even post any starter code because there's really nothing to this. I have a layout here where you can click Chuck Norris joke, and then I have a text view called output where you could put the joke when you get the joke from the website, you know? So this button here, Chuck Norris joke, is it's called Chuck joke button, and it calls Chuck Norris click. Okay, so that sends me into this REST activity. I have Chuck Norris click right here. So what should I do when you call Chuck Norris click? Well, I should connect to that URL. We talked about that library called Ion. Okay, so that means I want to go back to the stuff we did last time. I want to look at my slides on libraries real fast, and let me just find the slide on Ion. If I want to use the Ion library, I have to put this line of code into my build thingy. So, you know, once we're pretty used to libraries, I'm going to just show up with these things already added, but I kind of want you to remember how to add libraries to your project. I paste this in, I sync my project. Now, once I have Ion attached to my project, I can, wait, do I have some imports? I cleaned out some of this code a minute ago. Let me delete some of this stuff. There. Now that I have Ion in my project, I can contact the website for the API using Ion when they press that button. So the format for contacting a website is following. I'm going to copy this template and paste it here. The URL I want is just the one that's in my browser over here. This icndb, like chucknorrisdb.com/joke/random. Then you have to say as what? I'll say as string. And then you have a callback. And basically the JSON data will be stored in this result variable. So I think a good starting point would be to say log.d for debug, Marty, the JSON data is : and $result. So let's just make sure that it worked. Import log. And I'll run it real fast on my emulator. Real fast, haha, yeah, right. Gradle build running. See, now I should have told you my Carmen Sandiego story while it's building this stupid thing. All right, wait for it. Okay, Chuck Norris joke, I click it, it doesn't show anything on the screen, but in the log it says the JSON data is, and it got the data that we talked about, right? Okay, but we're missing something. We can't finish this yet because, again, like the answer here is not to like go through this, where is it, JSON output and look for curly braces and look for quotation marks and try to slice it all apart ourselves. That the whole point is I don't want to do that. I've agreed on a standard data format so that hopefully I do not have to do that. So let me teach you how to actually like slice apart the data from this format here. The way you do that is you use something called a JSON object. This slide might look a little weird. I'm starting with an example before I show you the list of all the things you could do. If you wanted to sort of take this JSON data and you wanted to turn it into like Kotlin objects that you could talk to, Kotlin variables you could talk to, you would say, if you had that entire thing there as a string called data, you would say val JSON equals a JSON object made from that data. So that first line on line 3 there would read all that in and slice it all apart and parse it. So then, if you want to know the value of the private field, you'd say private equals JSON.getBoolean private. You could say get Boolean, get string, get int, get whatever. You understand? So like I could say subject equals get string called subject. And then if you want to access these like elements of these arrays, you could say, well, the JSON array called 2, I'll store that as A. And then once I have that array, I can say get string 0, get string 1. I think you might be able to use the brackets here too. But like, you understand this JSON object gizmo, as long as you know the names of the little fields to reach into, it'll sort of slice everything apart and give you back the individual pieces out of there. To me, this feels like talking to a map. Put and get and that kind of stuff, you know? And if it has a nested object inside of it, like that message thing is a little object inside the overall object. So, hey, overall JSON object, please get me the inner JSON object called message. And then, hey, inner message object, give me the string called language, which would be English. Give me the string called text, which would be called this weekend. So does that make sense? I mean, maybe this does not seem very clean and pleasant to you or something, but I guess like I didn't have to deal at all with like slicing and dicing this. I just had to kind of know what pieces I wanted to look at. And this code here is meant to be exhaustive where I extract every piece out of that thing. You don't always need to extract every single piece out of a JSON payload, you know? In fact, if I look at the data that we get back from Chuck Norris, usually what I do if I'm writing an app that talks to data, I'll say something like, you know, this function pulls data from the Chuck Norris API. The data is in the following format. And then I just paste one of the JSON outputs in there. Sometimes maybe I'll even pretty print it and paste it so I can just look at the thing. So yeah, actually let me do that. I think that's a better thing to do. Let me, oops, more like this. And then let's do the pretty print. Where's the pretty print? Here, here, paste, something like that. There, okay? So now it just helps me like to look at it as I'm trying to deal with it and parse it and stuff, right? Usually I like to write a function to separate that out, like kind of I'm doing some JSON, some ion stuff here. Usually I want to get out of this little callback and get out of all the kind of layers of indentation that I have here. So I usually write some kind of function called like process data, or process, chuck data or something, and I'll say send the result that I got here from that's a string of the data that comes back from the website. Give me that result as the parameter here. So like I'll write a function for that, and I'll say private fun process chuck data, and result is a string, So now if I'm going to do stuff like I said with the data, actually let me move this comment down here so I can see it. Okay. You make a JSON object. So you say like val JSON equals a JSON object made from this result data, and I'll import him. Oops. There. So I want you to help me out for a second here. I want that. I want that joke. I'm trying to extract the joke out of all that other crud around it, and I want to hold on to that joke as like a string. So can you help me? Like, how do I get that out of here? Yeah.
I'm using that slide of yours as reference. Probably you write val object is equals to json.get object value.
Okay, so value is this part. Right, so obj, this thing here represents all of that, right? Great. So I'm still not quite to the joke, but I'm getting closer. What next? Yeah.
Object.getString. Well, you need new variable. Object.getString. Joke.
Okay, so maybe joke equals object.getString joke. Right, so within this object, the key of joke maps to this thing that I want. So yeah, get the string out of there named joke. Okay, that's it. So if everything worked, then that's the joke, So on the screen here, I want to put the joke on the screen, so it would be called output. The text view that I want to put it in is called output. So why don't I just write like output.text equals joke? The variable name output refers to that widget and stuff, right? Let's try it. That's not so bad, right? I mean, it's only like 2 or 3 lines to like dig all into that data and pull out a particular piece that I cared about, right? So that's not actually so bad. Chuck Norris joke. Using his trademark roundhouse kick, Chuck Norris once made a field goal in RJ Stadium in Tampa Bay from the 50-yard line of Qualcomm Stadium in San Diego. Whatever. Blah, blah, blah. He was teamed with Hulk Hogan against King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant. He pinned all 3 at the same time, including his partner, Hulk Hogan. Okay, whatever. Haha. So the joy and beauty of Chuck Norris jokes now is bestowed upon our app here. Yes?
When you did the as string, could you do like as JSON object?
That's a great question. I sort of sidestepped that, but you're right to ask about it. This ion library, when you download from a URL, you're supposed to say like dot as something, and you're supposed to say what type of data is it? Is it an image? Is it a binary format? Is it, is it whatever? There is a method called as JSON object, but I think the short answer is it doesn't work very well. Ion sort of has some JSON stuff built into Ion, but they didn't do a very good job of it. And I actually think the better way to handle it is to just get the raw string of that data and then handle that with our own JSON logic from scratch. And in fact, I'm going to show you a JSON processing library that's better. And so I just think the better thing is to have the data as a string and then do whatever we want to do to treat it as JSON data. But yeah, there is another way to go here where you kind of do that. But that sends us into a whole different API of JSON related parsing objects that I don't want to use. So yeah, anyway, good question. So yeah, any other questions so far about the API and the data and what we wrote, the code and all that kind of stuff? Yeah.
How do you what if you don't want to use the Ion library? How else do you get the data?
Oh, right. If you don't want Ion, I mean, I like to show you guys how to do things without libraries some of the time as well. I guess what I would say is this is icky to do without Ion. There is a class in Java and Kotlin called HTTP URL connection. And if you Google, like, how do I connect to a URL in Kotlin or Java or Android, it'll show you how to do it. But it's like a whole page of code just to, like, connect to something. And then you have to deal with, like, what if it's too slow and it times out, and what if there's a access error, and like it's so bad. Like, it's one of these things where, like, if it weren't that bad, I just wouldn't use Ion. But it's like so insultingly bad that I just don't even want to show you like the real way to do it. If you are curious and you just don't really want to do everything with a library, I would say Google for like HTTP URL connection in Android, and you'll see that on the screen, and then you will close that tab and you'll say, okay, Ion, I love you. Yeah, but I mean, basically the people who wrote Ion use that to build Ion, so that basically we don't have to do that. I've never encountered anybody who uses the raw stuff to do URL connections in Android because it's just so bad. Like, they always use some kind of library on top of it to make it less bad, is how I've found it. Anyway, one thing I'll say is, like, when I go play with web APIs, often I don't get it right on the first try, because, you know, a lot of this stuff here where I'm like getting this object and getting this string, it's easy to get it wrong. Like, you're off by one amount of braces in your understanding of the data, or like, you know, it's an array instead of an object, so you just don't quite parse it properly. If you don't parse it properly, you'll get an exception that pops out into the run trace of your program, like down here in this run tab. So sometimes when you download the data from the site, you should look down there. The other thing, I mean, this might sound obvious, but I guarantee a lot of you forget to do this, including myself. I forget to do this as well. When you download data from somewhere, you should just like print the data out first before you try to do anything to it, because a lot of times you print it out and you're like, oh, it says file not found, or it says error. Oh, like you thought you were getting some data and actually it wasn't right. Like, you had, you know, it's pretty hard to get this wrong unless the service went down. So of course, I mean, this might seem obvious, but you could just copy paste this URL in your browser and see if it works that way. That's fine. But like, sometimes you're sort of concatenating pieces together, like, you know, you're doing this plus whatever, and you attach different subsets and strings depending on different ifs and elses and stuff, and, you know, you'll sometimes get the logic of that wrong. And so just like make it so that your code prints the data on the console first, and just take a look and make sure if it looks how it's supposed to look before you start trying to parse it and stuff, you know. Anyway, those are just some debugging suggestions from me. That's the Chuck Norris API. There's other stuff you can do with it, but I mean, I really wanted it to be a stupid API so that we could kind of see it and then go on to another one. So let's look at another API. I did dogs last time, and I know some of you were upset or offended. You wanted cats. So here's your darn cats. Okay, don't say I don't do anything for you, cat people. There is a cat API that will send you cats. There's actually a lot of cat APIs. There's a one that I found. It's not really an API. It's for like placeholder images of cats. Like, sometimes when you're making a website design, you want a header or a logo, but you don't have the graphic designer hasn't made the logo yet. There's a site that if you put in a certain URL and then a width and a height, it'll make a random cat picture of that size and send it to you, so you could like use that as your temporary logo or whatever. Anyways, lots of cat related things on the web. But there is a cat API. So it's free, it's easy to use. The thing is, this is the one that went down this last night and came back up sometime this morning, and I was really hoping I could show you this one today. But it says on the slide there, is there a key or something required? It says optional. You can use it with no key, but I think there are some limits. Like, there are some features where you can vote on whether you like the cats or something, and you can't do that without a key. There's some functionality that's blocked without a key. And I think if you have no key, your computer might only have a certain number of requests it'll send you before it'll stop talking to you, stuff like that. So anyway, here's how to use the API. This one, each one looks a little different. You have to read the documentation for how they work. But every request starts with this. And then what follows that is, if you just want to get some random pictures, you can just say /API/images/get. And then after the get, you write a series of parameter values with question marks and ampersands in them. Now, this is a little bit confusing. We didn't have something like this with Chuck Norris, but let me try to describe this to you. If you've learned anything about web programming, you would have seen something like this. So this is something in web programming called a query string. It's basically a way of encoding name-value pairs in a URL. And essentially, they act as parameters. I talked about how you might have something called like marty.com/search/meals/date or something like that. That's pretty common. But another style of URL that might be common as well would be you could say something like martystep.com question mark operation equals search and type equals meals and date equals that. And so that's pretty hard to read, but if I just like start breaking that apart, question mark means like I want to search for something. Op equals search means set the op parameter to search. Type equals meals, set the type parameter to meals. Date equals that. So that URL with all those question marks and ampersands and stuff, it's just some way that I can send a little bit of extra information to the server. And when the server detects that I requested that URL, it slices the URL apart and it looks at the pieces and it uses that to go look up in its data storage and send me back whatever it thinks that I'm asking for, okay? So like every API that you learn, you got to learn the like URL format that they want, but they'll have that in their documentation. So that's kind of all this is, So with this cat thing, you say cat API /images/get, and then you say what format of data you want, you say what size the images should be, and how many results you want to get. So if I write like format equals JSON, and I go to my browser, here are some cat pictures. So if I copy this and I come paste this back here, that's the JSON that I get. It's again hard to read. It's got no spaces in it, so I will paste it in here, and it comes out over here, and I'll paste it back here. So it looks like that. So the overall result is an array, and the array has objects inside, and each object has an ID number, which I think is some sort of internal number they use. I don't really care about that, I don't think. It has a URL of that image, and it has a source of if you wanted to view that on their website with its own page or something, I think. I mean, the thing I find most interesting is this part, right? So if I copy these URLs and I paste them here, I get a cat picture. Oh, pretty cute, right? I guess. I mean, I'm assuming. You people who like cats probably think this is cute or something, I guess. Looks like a lot of work to me is what I see when I look at that. But whatever. So like cat pictures. Now if I wanted to connect to that library, that API, and get cat pictures and show them on screen, that sounds awesome. Let's do it, right? So if I go back to the screen here, let me show you that the layout, I've got a Chuck Norris button and I've got a cat pics button. And when I click that button, it calls a function named catClick. And I also have a really big image view here where I could show an image. So I think what I want to do first is I want to see if I can extract a single random cat picture and show it on the screen here. And then once that works, that'll be a good point. And then I want to grab several images and show all of them and all in a little collage or something, okay? Best app ever. So I click on the cat pics button, it executes the catClick function. The catClick function is empty. What kind of stuff should I do in the catClick function? How do I get started here? Yeah?
Ion file.
I should use Ion to go get the, connect to the web server, ask for the JSON data, right? Okay, I'll go copy, it's pretty similar to this one up here, right? I'll copy this, and I will paste it down here, except the URL is more like, what was the URL? This. Okay? And instead of saying process Chuck data, I will say process cat data. And now this process cat data function, wait, process cat data looks like this. Takes a result that's a string. Okay, so we learned that we use JSON object to process the data. Let me copy and paste the JSON here so I can see it. It looks like that. Maybe, since there's like a lot of images, let me just delete one of them or something there. It looks like that. So, how do I do it? Well, this one's kind of weird because the overall outer thing, it doesn't have curly braces around it. It has brackets around it. So I think that means it's a JSON array. Can't you make a JSON array from a string? No? If I say val JSON equals JSON object result. I'm wondering if that's going to have trouble though, because it's like, you know, hard brackets like that. I don't know, we can try it. Well, what if I just want to grab the first image out of there? Yeah, actually, I haven't encountered that before. I was going to show you this in a slightly different way. When the overall JSON comes back, it's usually surrounded by brackets, and everything inside is some sort of field, you know? So like this thing here would be like images colon that or something. You know what I mean? Like that's normally what you would see in properly formatted JSON data. I'm not actually sure if the outer element being an array is even considered valid. Because I don't know who made this cat API, so I actually don't know if it's valid cat JSON data or not. Well, let me think. I don't know, actually. Let me just check real quick. Kotlin JSON parse JSON array from string. Not JSON parsing. JSON array. Okay, I tell you what. Let's do images colon there. Do you see what I've done? I have made it so that it says bracket images colon and then all the stuff that the API is going to send back and then that. Do you understand why I did that? I'm a little worried that this outer thing being an array instead of an object, like that it won't understand how to parse that, basically. Okay, so if I parse that into a JSON object, if I want to get the URL of the first of the images, how do I do it? I want this URL right here. Okay, sure. So val images array equals JSON dot get JSON array called images. Okay, so now that variable stores that, which is basically the original payload. Okay, then you want me to get the first element of that. That's element 0. So if I say val first image equals images array dot get JSON object at index 0. Okay, so now first image is that. Okay. Getting closer. How do I get that, the rest of it out? Yeah? Okay, val URL equals first image dot get string called URL, right? Within this object, get the string associated with the key of URL. Yeah, great. By the way, if you don't like sort of all this stuff here, you can kind of mush all this together. I do like separating each piece out when I'm thinking it through, but you can kind of do stuff like, JSON object blah blah blah, dot get JSON array, dot get JSON object 0, dot get string. Do you understand? Like, you saw some of these other examples on previous lectures where they're like dot 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 with different chained things. That's kind of this here. So I could basically do like val URL equals like all of that, You could. If you like that better, there you go. Now I got the URL. That's the URL of a cute cat picture, right? Now what? It's a great start.
One question.
Yeah.
Can you edit the JSON file so that it gives something you're comfortable with?
Can you modify it or edit it? Well, I did slightly edit it here by wrapping it in a brace or something like that. But you generally don't want to edit it too much because, it's coming back from the server, and so you sort of, I guess I'm wondering what you're thinking of doing. Like, you can modify the data, but it won't send the modification back to the server. It'll just modify it locally while you're looking at it, basically. If you want to modify the data, the API would probably have to give a different URL that you could connect to that would be like a modify URL. And that would be how you would tell the server that you want him to modify his data, and then he would internally do that in response to your web request or something. Yeah. So I get this URL for this image. If I want to put the image on the screen, like basically that image, I want it to appear right there. How do I do that? Yeah?
You use Picasso.
I thought you were going to say use a library, which would also be right. I use the Picasso library. We learned about that. That library is an image processing library. So Picasso, I can just grab the line here to add that to my project. We learned about that a few lectures ago, last lecture, whatever. Where is that? Picasso library. Here, I just have to add this to my dependencies of my project here. So I will paste that here, sync, and I go back to my activity, and I'll say, hey, Picasso. Now, I remember the sort of basic command. You say picasso.get import, and then you say .load from the URL, and then you say .into, and then you say the image view you want to show it in. That's kind of the simplest like Picasso usage. The image view that I want to put it in is called image output, this one right here. So I will say put it into the image output. That's it, I think. Let's run it. Oh wait, it says, what's wrong? It says could be private, fine, private fun. Did I call process? Yeah, I called process cat data. Okay, I think I'm good. Let's go see if it works. I think I hit the compile button. It's already running it or setting it up. Random cat picture. A cat wearing a tie. Wow, that's really something. What's wrong with these people? Okay, see, pretty cool app, right? Yeah, the API is the star, right? What the hell is this? I just don't know what to make of all this stuff. Yeah, so cool. Last thing, we have a couple minutes left. Let me just do one more thing. The API, one of the nice things about it is it sends back several different images, right? So it kind of would be nice if we would show more than one on the screen at a time. So let's do that. We basically want to do a lot of this same stuff, but we want to do it for each of the indexes, not just the index 0, right? So maybe I could kind of start setting that up real quick. Let's do val array equals that, and then we sort of want val URL equals array dot get JSON object 0 dot get string URL, like that. but I want to do this for each index. So I think I want something like for I in 0 to array dot, what's it called, length minus 1. For each of those, do that, sort of. But I want to say index I. If you're like, what's this? We haven't done a lot of for loops, but it's way back in the Kotlin slides. That's how you say loop from I equals 0 to something. Okay. But if I do this, that won't quite do what I want, right? I mean, it's going to not quite look right? What's this going to do if I run it this way? Yeah? Yeah, I have one giant image view, so it's going to put each of the different pictures into the same image. They're just all going to replace. The last one I think is going to like win. I'm only going to see one of them, right? So if this is what you want, if you want to see a lot of images, what you should probably do is you should make multiple image views, one for each of the images, right? So if that's what you want, then instead of having this image view to begin with, you should probably make some sort of like scrolling grid layout thing. So I went ahead and wrote the XML for this. I have a scroll view here that just fills this. Scroll view is just a wrapper that makes scroll bars. And inside of that scroll view is a grid layout called grid with 3 rows and 2 columns. So the grid layout would look sort of like this, but there's nothing in it. And if I want to put stuff in it, I could. So like in my code, if I create image views and put them into there, they will appear in a little grid on this screen here. Got it? So for each of these images, I can't just do this. I need to create a new image view. Val image equals, you might say, how do I make a new image view? Well, this goes back to that lecture on dynamic UI. I made flags and I put them in. Now what I did in that lecture was I made a little XML file and then I inflated it or something. I'm not going to do that here. The reason you use those layout managers and XML files and inflation is if you have like several widgets and you want to sort of set all that up to look just so, and then you want to sort of stamp copies of that set of things. I don't really need to do that here because I just sort of want one thing. I want one image view. It wouldn't really be worth my time to make an XML file for that. I'll make an image view for this. You always say this when you create a widget. If I say Picasso get load into img, that will put it into that image view. Now I want to put that image view on the screen. The way you do that is you talk to this guy, grid, the grid layout. You say, hey grid dot add view img. The only thing missing is you probably need to like size it. I think you're supposed to say image.layout params. This is in the slides from that lecture equals a layout params object that stores, we probably want to say match parent. I think it's view group dot layout params dot match, or not match parent, wrap content. Wrap content for the width and wrap content. Basically, I'm setting the size of the thingy, and then I'll load it onto the screen. Let's give it a try. Oh, before I do this, let me clear the grid so it doesn't just accumulate infinite. There's something called like remove all views. So let's try this. Let's see if we can load all of the images from the thing and put them all on the screen here, and then we'll be done. Hey, there's 3 of them. If I went up to here and I changed this call to say results per page equals 8, I will, just to indulge myself, run it one last time, and I'll show 8 cat pictures on the screen all at once. So there we go. Yay. All right. Well, have a great weekend. See you. Thanks for that tepid applause. That was great.